In terms of bringing innovation into the UK, I actually think that's not necessarily the right question to be asking, because I think we've heard right throughout the morning from both entrepreneurs and regulators that actually it's not necessarily the level of innovation being brought into the UK, or more particularly actually being developed in the UK, that is necessarily the issue. The issue is whether or not that then moves from pre-commercialisation into products, jobs, domestic and exported jobs. And that's really, I think, where the issue is. And I think I'd just like to make 2 or 3 observations as to things, and none of these will be earth-shattering to anybody in this room, I'm sure. We've heard a lot about longer-term framework, which isn't, I hasten to add, and this is where I think there is an issue politically with all politicians actually, is that as soon as you ask a politician to talk about longer-term frameworks, they think that actually what you're talking about is, welfare support for a poor industry. They're not the same thing. It's really interesting, the contrast between what happens in the heat and renewable market, for instance, compared to what happens in the transport market. Government think very little, generally speaking, of meeting the investment cycles of the automotive industry, which is 7 to 10 years. It's really interesting to see the level of innovation that's driven both from the UK, probably the most innovative automotive market in the world, compared to the difficulties of getting across the phrase that was used this morning, the valley of death, between pre-commercialisation and commercialisation. So the question of longer term and consistency comes up time and time again. I do get a bit depressed about the sort of binary nature of is it regulation or is it not regulation. There's good regulation and there's bad regulation. And I think even if you were talking to a panel from the Environment Agency, they would broadly endorse that view. And I think what we've got to do as an industry, as a collection of bodies that are committed to the environmental agenda, is to make sure that innovation is driven by light touch, progressive regulation, which is not about creating barriers for business. And we've got good examples, both in this sector and in other sectors, where that's already happening. Final point on the first area, it isn't all about technology. Some of the things that we need to do, and various people have talked about them already this morning, data, process, finance. Those are 3 things that are absolutely instrumental in delivering technological innovation, not into the marketplace, but actually into commercialisation. So I would just ask that we need to think about that. So who should be doing all this, thinking? Well, frankly, all and everyone, whether it's government, business, local authorities, universities, organisations like my own. But I do think that we need to think outside of that regulatory framework, whether it's from a financial point of view or from a technical point of view. It's incredible. I don't know how many people have actually been to Silicon Roundabout. It's been much in the news this week because of the state of the rents. However, if you actually go and spend some time with some of those incubator setups, what's really interesting is not just the technologies they're talking about, it's actually the way they finance them and how they've created legal frameworks to finance them. Whether that's public bonds, whether that's provident societies, whether that's crowdsourcing, angel investment, they're not actually relying on some of the traditional institutional frameworks. And I think there's a lesson there for us technically and in terms of regulation too. In terms of what role the private sector can play, well, I mean, clearly I'm preaching to a converted audience here, but there are major examples of where the private sector is already driving innovation. And I was really interested on several occasions this morning from those people who are basically saying, well, actually, all we really want government to do is to create, as I say, a light touch, deliverable framework that protects the consumer, and then get out of the way. Just get out of the way and allow not just entrepreneurs, but established businesses to develop technologies. And we're starting to see that, as I say, in certain sectors, whether it's automotive, aerospace. These are some of the leading areas in the world. And they're all evidenced, and I think somebody said it earlier, IT being probably the third, where those industries are actually much more assertive. And I would say, don't wait for government. In fact, if we wait for government, we'll be waiting forever. We've got to lead the charge in terms of delivering on some of those aspirations. And we've got 2 or 3 fantastic opportunities. We need to build 250,000 new homes every single year for the next decade to meet projected demand. We should be not allowing those houses to be built without every single house having the renewable technologies, the water-based technologies, the mobility solutions that are actually going to deliver a future-proof housing for the future. If we do that, we've missed a massive opportunity. Let's not wait for the government to tell us how they're going to regulate it. Let's tell them how we're going to deliver it.